cage pieces that even though now a lot of you have to read about it or see a video about it, I don't eat light. Oh, okay. When we were doing that piece, people did not like us, okay? So you think like, oh my God, she did so well. No, actually, we were pariahs. The museum directors and curators who were dealing with it really were pissed. And I had to deal for like a year with, giving talks about the work and having people stand up and yell at me all the time about how it was unethical to dissimulate and so on and so forth, and which I found completely laughable. Which artist tells you the truth about everything they do? I don't know any, frankly. And I was like, so you don't believe in theater? It's like, we're characters. Hello? But there was this really strong kind of moralistic thing of like, you get back in your corner and go do your job of like being a happy other, and make us feel good about difference in the world and stop, dragging out all our dirty laundry, which I think that's really what it was more about, that it was personally embarrassing for a lot of people who represent cultural institutions to have to admit that their audiences could be so easily fooled. But I just want to point that out now that almost 20 years have passed. The validation didn't come until much later. Definitely not while we were doing it. And even when we went to that festival, the Europeans were kind of pissed that we were selected to represent the United States because we weren't white. They didn't consider us to be representative enough of American art to participate in a European festival. So that's the way things were then, and I don't know how different they are now, but I just like to remind people that it was not easy to do that at the time, not only because of the physical stress of being in the cage, but because of the kind of reaction that we were getting from institutions. So then I decided to, working with Neo Bustamante, who's a really wonderful and very eccentric Chicana performance artist, we decided to focus this exploration of cultural stereotyping on Latin women in the present, and in the present that was in the 90s. And around the time of the Zapatista Revolution and the Free Trade Agreement and the beginning of the special period in Cuba that basically forced the island to open itself up to capitalism and brought in a lot of sex tourism, or revived the sex tourism that had existed there in the 50s. And so we did a kind of field work looking at these different contexts, because we figured that tourism was the principal means by which people from North America came in contact with people from Central and South America. And so we looked at the different kinds of tourist scenarios to see what we could draw from them. So we looked at kind of New Age tourism in the Southwest and kind of leftist, cultural, revolutionary tourism in Chiapas. We went to what at that time was the kind of heart of the Zapatista Revolution. And then we went to Cuba and did field work with jineteras, which are female, I call them traffickers in sexual fantasy more than sex workers. Because what the kinds of exchanges with people coming in were not just about, it's not like old-fashioned prostitution New York style where it's about, a sex act, payment, and it's over, but about a more kind of long-term relationship that could go over a number of days or weeks or months, and that, the ideal scenario for the Cuban would be to actually get the person to marry her so that she could emigrate, but in the search for that, we have these multiple relationships coming up. And we developed this piece called Stuff that we toured with for 3 years to like 27 locations all over the place. And the script was built out of our research that involved like exchanges with children in Mexico who who sell the Zapatista paraphernalia. Do you guys know what the Zapatistas are? Like, I see a lot of faces that look kind of, in fact, Comandante Marcos, the guy with the black ski mask, in 1994 stands up to the media and says that these Indians in the south of Mexico are going to rebel against the Mexican government and they want autonomy. And he became really famous because he wouldn't identify himself. And soon after, they begin this rebellion against central Mexican authority. A kind of cottage industry of artifacts starts to be produced in Chiapas. The dolls with the little masks, the t-shirts, this and that. And you know, the impression that people had when they would go through there or buy them on the streets of New York was that they were supporting the Zapatista revolution. Well, most of it was being made by evangelical Christian Indians in Chiapas who were looking for a way to make a quick buck. And little kids, you go into San Cristobal, which is the city in that mountain area of Chiapas where this rebellion was going on. And these little kids, like this big, would be all dressed in beautiful traditional garb, which is not how most indigenous kids dress. And would come up to you and start, you know, telling you, this is Raquel, su comandante Raquel, and this one is su comandante Marcos, and this one is Carmona, and this one. You're just like, whoa, what's going on? And they learned to rap, right, to convince foreigners, and they had to learn the whole story, even though their parents were going to churches and their grandparents, they were telling them that the Zapatistas were the devil. They're making a living. And they also learned fairly quickly that they had to look like Indians in order to attract the Europeans, and so they would entice people, say, you can photograph me if you give me $5 or you buy me a pepino, right? And so they would get these beautiful get-ups that you would usually only see in a museum and then wear them in the main plaza in San Cristobal. So we hung out with them. And I hung out with sex workers in Cuba for a while and got some really great stories about how they saw the world. How many blowjobs does it take to buy a refrigerator? What do you have to look like to attract a Spaniard versus a Canadian versus an Argentine versus an Italian? What is too much and what is too little? All these things. They had the whole system set up. Like Spaniards like the really dark-skinned girls, the Italians like the lighter-skinned ones. You have to have extension braids to get this one. If you want to, in German, you have to look really like an African. And they basically taught me like their view of the market, right? From the point of view of what they were engaging in. And I found it absolutely fascinating. So the piece was, written, we wrote it based on these exchanges, but we also used phrase books that were specifically designed to interact with each group. And there were, at that time in the 90s, sex tourism in the Caribbean was pretty big, and in Brazil. And so there were phrase books available for like how to pick people up in bars. And so a lot of the script that we used was built out of these kinds of exchanges, and we would drag people from the audience on stage to engage with us. Okay, so I did this piece in '97 as part of the Johannesburg Biennale. It was called Rites of Passage. And I'm of the generation that, when I was in college, Mandela was still in prison, and